What would happen if Deku had the strongest fire quirk? Let's find out. But before we start, please hit the subscribe button, like the video if you like this story. Also consider sharing this with your friends, this really helps. Let's start. In the Midoriya family's kitchen, Izuku sipped from the glass of water he poured. It was 1 in the morning on Monday night and he had school tomorrow, or today, rather, but he needed the drink. He could feel his body growing warm again as his quirk slowly came back to him, and now that he wasn't freezing, he was feeling a bit too warm. He'd adjust before long, but for now he needed some ice water to feel comfortable again. He rubbed his eyes and then ran a hand through his messy curls. This weekend had been fun, what with everyone hanging out here on Saturday and playing video games. He had a great time, even if he'd spent practically the whole time bundled up in a bunch of blankets with Eri. She'd almost slept through it all. Eri had eventually woken up, though she remained hidden when she realized that Izuku had guests over. He tried to coax her out, but Eri wasn't in the mood to socialize. She had wanted to just stay close to him, and the closest she got to seeing the others was when her horn poked out from the top of the blankets. Mina had squealed at the sight. The rest of the weekend had been quiet after that. Katsuki had dropped by again on Sunday, alone this time, so that he and Izuku could play a few rounds of a game they had an upcoming competition for. They'd settled themselves at the kitchen table with their laptops, Izuku still wrapped in blankets and Eri snoozing in his lap under another layer. The covers had eventually fallen a bit, so that her face had become visible, and revealed that she was clinging to Izuku's shirt like an infant. Inko had started taking pictures of that without any prior explanation. It had confused Izuku to the point that he almost died in-game until Katsuki snapped at him again. Surprisingly, Eri didn't actually mind being around Katsuki. She never actively started conversations or approached him, but she was noticeably more relaxed when Katsuki was around than she was around the rest of their classmates. Maybe the funniest thing about that was Katsuki didn't actually seem to mind having her around, either. He smiled a bit. How on earth had Eri managed to worm her way into their family dynamic so easily? Even Katsuki toned his cussing down to zero, seemingly without actually intending to, whenever she was around. Even if she was still incredibly shy and clingy, she found a place in their hearts where she fit perfectly. Izuku, where are you? The whimper got his attention immediately, and Izuku turned his head to see Eri hurrying out of his room, glancing around frantically and trying to find him. He shifted slightly in the chair and called to her softly. Over here, Eri. She snapped her head towards the kitchen and ran to him, feet lightly padding along the floor until she'd reached her protector. Izuku swept the girl up into his arms and bundled her close. She buried herself in his chest, squeezing at his shirt with her small hands. Izuku stroked her hair gently. Did you have a bad dream? No, she whispered. I got cold. I'm sorry. Why are you up? It's so dark. I was just thirsty. I'm sorry if I frightened you. Do you want a drink? She nodded and closed her eyes, growing sleepy now that she was safe again. Izuku downed the rest of his water, then got up and walked to the fridge, still holding Eri up. He retrieved another cup and then filled hers up halfway before returning to the table. Izuku offered her the cup once he was seated again, and watched as Eri took a few sips. Thank you. Izuku waited for her to drink and let his thoughts drift to a call he'd received from All Might on Monday, when they'd gotten a day off following the villain attack at USJ. I've spoken with Principal Nezu and the rest of the UA staff regarding Eri, he'd said. They've agreed with what you, Sakauchi, and I decided on Friday. Eri's quirk is too volatile and dangerous for anyone but UA to teach her to harness it. I know this last week was trying, so I'm asking a lot, but you'll probably have to stay after school Tuesday for her first lesson. We'll discuss it more on Tuesday, so talk to Eri about it, and make sure she understands that we're just going to help her. He honestly had no idea how All Might and the principal intended to teach Eri how to control her quirk. Eri herself seemed to regard a quirk as a curse, and on top of that, it was so dangerous that even the slightest slip-up would probably kill someone. He also didn't know the finer details of her quirk. Izuku had only seen it once, after all. There were undoubtedly factors to her quirk he wasn't aware of yet. He'd asked Eri if she knew what a quirk did specifically, but all she knew was that it made people disappear. Izuku hadn't pushed her since thinking about it frightened her. Eri had taken the news that they'd be teaching her how to use her quirk with mixed feelings. On one hand, she was terrified that she was going to hurt someone, but on the other, she was desperate to be free of her curse, and wanted to find out how to control it. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Izuku asked her. Eri nodded and sipped her water again. Yes. I'll be there the whole time, okay? It'll be fine. She looked up at him for a moment and then asked him something he wasn't expecting. Izu. Do you get scared when you use your quirk? He blinked at the question, but replied without hesitating. Every time. Eri fell silent, and Izuku decided it was about time they went to sleep. He left the glass of water on the table and stood up quietly with the girl still in his arms. Come on, let's go back to bed, okay? She nodded and closed her eyes as Izuku carried her back to the bedroom. The next day, everyone was gathered back in Class 1A as usual. The students were buzzing with excitement following the event at USJ. Sheesh, all the news channels made such a big deal out of the villain attack. Denki exclaimed to Ijiro and Kyuka. They even threw pictures of us all on TV. Well duh, the hero course that keeps pumping out the best pros in the world was attacked, Kyuka pointed out. Of course it got so much attention. Ijiro nodded. Yeah, I thought we were dead after 13, and Mr. Aizawa got taken out, but we were alright thanks to the big three and All Might. Did you hear? They said that Mario took out 25 of the 72 villains who showed up. Yeah, that was pretty impressive, Hanta agreed, leaning over his desk towards him. And it only took him a couple of minutes. They were all small fry, but he didn't look hurt or tired at all after it was all over. Same for Nejire and Tamaki. Can you imagine what might have happened if they weren't there or if All Might hadn't shown up? Knock it off, Hanta. Minoru whined. Just thinking about it is gonna make me piss my... Aw, shut up. Katsuki snarled at the short teen, making Minoru jump in panic. Grow up hair, loser. Kyuka glanced over her left shoulder for a moment. But we need to address the obvious elephant in the room. True. Mina stood up and grinned in Izuku Adiri's direction. Our very own class prez took out one of the big shots. Izuku reddened. Don't try to avoid it. Denki pointed at him. What was that? You put that Naomi thing on the barbecue. I had no idea you could do that. Yeah, that was a lot of firepower all of a sudden, so you put a finger on her chin. Didn't you say during class introductions that you couldn't make that much fire on your own? I can't on my own, Izuku stammered, nervously rubbing the back of his head. See, we got dropped to the Inferno Z zone, and I took as much flame as I could and tried to escape, but that foggy guy teleported us back to the center, and I brought the F-fire with me, and I was desperate and... Breathe. Ijiro stopped him, smiling nervously. Good grief, you mumble storms are gonna deprive you of oxygen one of these days. Sorry. I still have trouble listening to you in class and then believing that you're the same guy in hero training, Rikido said. It's like a switch flips, and you go from being all nervous and quiet to bold and daring. Right? Achako agreed. Everyone. Tenya suddenly raced in and stood at the front of the class. Homeroom is about to start. Everyone be quiet and take your seats. We're all sitting, Hanta pointed out with a grin. You're the only one who isn't. Tenya retreated to his seat, disgruntled. Shoot. Don't sweat it, Achako giggled. Suo, Mina leaned back to look at the rest of the class. Any idea who's gonna run homeroom today? Definitely not Mr. Aizawa, Tsuyu replied. He's supposed to be recovering from his injuries in the hospital. The door opened then, revealing a mummified Aizawa. Morning. You're back too soon. You're being too much of a pro. Denki's mouth fell open. Are you okay? Toru asked. In what universe does that look okay? Nashira retorted. Eri stared at the teacher curiously and then back at Izuku. Why is he covered in toilet paper? PFFT. Achako hid her face in her desk to hide her giggles, but it hardly mattered because most of the class was snickering at the innocent comment. Aizawa ignored them. My well-being is irrelevant. More importantly, you guys aren't done fighting yet. That earned him the silence and nervous looks from the entire class. The pro was quiet for a moment and then explained. The UA Sports Festival is drawing near. Ijiro threw his hands up. It's a normal school event. Hold your horses. Denki slapped one of his hands over the other teen's mouth. Is that okay? Kyuka asked Aizawa skeptically. Villains literally just invaded UA 3 days ago. Isn't it too soon for that? Won't they just see this festival as another chance to attack us? Nashira agreed. Aizawa shook his head. The staff thinks this is a good opportunity to show that our crisis management system is rock solid by holding the event now. Plus security is getting beefed up to 5 times that of previous years. If anyone tries to start something, they'll be behind bars before they finish thinking about it. Above all else, this sports festival is a huge chance for you students. It's not something to get cancelled by a few villains. Especially because among those guarding the festival are the top 2 heroes in the world, All Might and Endeavor. Shoto's eyes darkened the moment Endeavor's name was dropped. Holy crap, Mina whistled. Yeah, that'll do it. The sports festival is one of Japan's biggest events. It basically took over for the Olympics after Quirks came around. All the top heroes around the country will be watching and scouting out you students. They'll assess your skills in this festival and decide which of you they'd like to approach to join their pro agencies after you graduate. You become sidekicks. Kyuka twirled one of her jacks around her finger. That's fine and all as long as we don't stay sidekicks forever. Sounds like something you do, Denki. I take offense to that. Said teen snapped back, but they both smirked humorously. Obviously, joining a famous agency will get you more experience and popularity, Aizawa continued. But you've got a limited amount of time to make an impression on them, so take this chance with all you've got and make it count. There's a sports festival every year that gives you only 3 chances to show off. If you're really aspiring to be a hero, you can't afford to miss this event. Don't slack off on your preparations. Yes, sir. Oh, and before I forget, let me tell you all something. The sports festival tries to make things as fair as possible, since it involves all the students, and not just the ones in the heroics course. As such, you won't be able to use your costumes, just the gym outfits we provide you. Izuku blanched. That was going to cripple his powers. He couldn't flare up without his costume to hide the fiery horns that sprouted when he went full throttle. Crap. That's all. Homeroom is dismissed. The rest of the school day went by slowly after the announcement of the sports festival. For the students, normal classes were pretty dull given their encounter with the villains at USJ just a few days earlier. Even their heroics class was boring today. They had to go through another physical test Aizawa had decided on to ensure everyone was in top condition after the USJ attack. When classes ended, Izuku was about to take Eri to her first after-school lesson, until he and the rest of 1A discovered a literal crowd outside their room. "Whoa, what's this all about?" Achako exclaimed in surprise, her eyes wide. The mass of teens was literally blocking the door to their class. Tenya chopped one of his hands at them. "Explain yourselves. Why are you blocking our path?" "We can't even get out, geez," Kyoka muttered. "Ain't it obvious?" Katsuki growled as he slung his pack over one shoulder. "They're scoping out the competition, you retards. They want to check out the class who fought villains at USJ the other day. We're the biggest challenge they've got to face at the sports festival." He got in the faces of several other kids at the front of the crowd, who cringed away from his glare. "What a waste of my time. Move it, extras. You can't just go calling people extras because you don't know who they are." Tenya reprimanded him, though he was utterly ignored by the teen in question. "Come on man," Hanta groaned. "You just made a bunch of enemies for all of us." "This is me caring." Katsuki snapped back. "You're sharp, I guess." A voice suddenly made itself known from the crowd of students blocking the door. A taller boy weaved his way through the crowd to the front, marked by his messy, dark purple hair. "It's true we came to check out the so-called stars of UA's first years, but you just seem like an ass. I suppose I was expecting more." Katsuki's eyebrow twitched dangerously. "Ah." The other teen met Katsuki's glare with indifferent eyes. "There's a lot of kids who wound up in the general education department or other departments because they failed the heroics one. Did you know that?" "Of course," Katsuki replied with a bored tone. "There's only 40 spots between classes 1A and 1B after all. Everyone knows that. Did you know that based on the results of the sports festival, students in those departments can be sent under review to be transferred to heroics?" The other teen asked curiously. "And the reverse is also possible. You guys are on the chopping block if you don't make a good showing, you know. Scoping out the competition." "Sure, but as for me, I came with a declaration of war." Izuku gulped. This guy was just as bold as Katsuki. The main difference was that he was more passive-aggressive, rather than straight-up "I will murder you" like Katsuki was. Katsuki smirked at the other teen and got in his face until they were eye-to-eye. "Oh, that's so. Right back at ya, then. I'll take your challenge seriously." If anything, that statement surprised the majority of Katsuki's class, who didn't expect him to do more than mock the mass of students who hadn't made it into heroics. But Katsuki was more than willing to stoke the fire of competition a little more. The entrance exam was more geared towards those with quirks best suited for combat, but that doesn't mean there aren't monsters still hiding in this crowd somewhere. You'd have to be dumb as hell to think there'd be no competition outside of the heroics course. The quirk like Eraser heads, one that erases other quirks, would have been useless in that exam. He's still a pro, though. There are probably other guys in here with quirks kinda like his. Katsuki's grin turned feral. "Are you one of them?" "Well, whether you are or not, I'm looking forward to crushing each and every one of you. Don't make a disgrace out of yourselves and give me a nice little platform to jump off of on my way to the top." The other teen smirked dangerously in return. "I'm looking forward to it as well, you jackass." Katsuki sneered at him, then glanced over his shoulder and grunted at Izuku. "Come on, Deku. You don't want Eri to be late for her lessons." Oh, right." Izuku stammered, then took Eri's hand and guided her towards the door. "Let's go, Eri." "Okay." She looked really nervous about all the eyes of the crowd suddenly on her, but fortunately they had the scariest guy in the school acting as a human bulldozer. Katsuki snarled viciously at the students in the hall, who had turned their attention to Eri out of surprise. "Move, before I murder you all." They backed off at his very real threat, giving Izuku and Eri the chance to follow Katsuki out of the crowd and into the hall. They escaped by turning a corner to the stairs, where Izuku and Eri had to go up, and Katsuki had to go down. "Thanks for that, Katsuki," Izuku sighed in relief. "I wasn't sure if we were gonna get out in time or not." "Well, you still owe me extra spicy chicken wings, so I'll add a drink on that tab," Katsuki replied casually as he started walking downstairs. To Izuku's surprise, Eri actually called after the volatile teen. Thank you." Katsuki paused on the steps and glanced over his shoulder at her, his face expressionless. He studied her for a moment before turning back and moving on. "Yeah, well, you're welcome, I guess. Don't slack off on your lessons." I won't." She stammered back. After making their way past the blockade of teenagers, Izuku took Eri to the principal's office to meet with Nezu and All Might for Iri's lessons. Tsukauchi was there as well, sitting in a chair along the wall to the principal's side. Come in, Nezu welcomed them. Please, have a seat. Thank you, Izuku said, guiding Eri to one of the chairs in front of Nezu's desk. He took a seat beside her and smiled at All Might and Tsukauchi, who nodded at them. Tea? Nezu offered. Izuku glanced at Eri, who looked at him and gave a small nod. Yes, please. Right, Nezu began to get the tea going and addressed them while they waited. First of all, let me thank you for helping All Might and Detective Tsukauchi with Eri. You've been a big help, young man. She needed help, Izuku said meekly, embarrassed by the praise. Nezu only smiled. It takes guts to speak up to the symbol of peace and a police detective about a person's well-being. This will certainly help Eri in the long run, as well. Speaking of which, how are you doing today, Eri? Eri ducked her head shyly, playing with the edge of her dress. I'm okay. I'm happy to hear that. The principal finished making their tea and poured it into a pair of small cups, which he then passed to the children. Careful with that, it's still hot. Blow on it for a bit so you don't scald your mouths. Eri, I'm going to explain what's happening here, but if at any time you don't feel comfortable, let Izuku know, alright? From what we understand, you don't know how to control your quirk. Is that correct? Yes. Do you know how your quirk works? Eri bit her lip. I don't know, it just makes things disappear. Nezu's voice was gentle and soothing. It's okay. That's what we're going to help you with here. We'll make sure you can control it from now on, alright? She didn't look so sure. Will it really be fine? Definitely. We've got some special teachers lined up to help you out. Nezu assured her. This isn't the first time Yue has taught a child like Eri how to control their quirk. It's rare, but on occasion, children are born with quirks that are simply too much for quirk counselors and standard teaching to handle. If their counselor makes that decision, the children can be brought to Yue for lessons. We have the means to ensure the safety of children with volatile quirks, after all. 13, for example. Izuku blinked in surprise. 13 had to do this. Of course. All Might laughed. He can create black holes, remember? Your average quirk counselor wouldn't even know where to begin with something like that. He spent a whole summer here as a child, when his quirk first appeared to learn how to control it. The Uea's school generally teaches its students how to use their quirks for heroics, Nezu explained. But we also place a large emphasis on teaching them control, so we've got a significant amount of experience teaching students how to channel really dangerous quirks. Izuku found that information quite fascinating. I see. It's not a well-known fact that we tutor such young children on occasion, Nezu admitted. But Yue is known for helping out the community whenever we can, and teaching is our forte. Everything will be alright, Eri. She looked more hopeful than before and that was enough for them. Okay. But Nezu smiled again. Now drink up. We'll go to Cementus's facility after this. Izuku was actually surprised by the number of teachers that were waiting for them. In addition to Nezu and All Might who had accompanied them here, Mr. Aizawa, Ectoplasm, and Cementus were there as well. Fortunately, Eri had met them all in Izuku's various classes, so she wasn't as intimidated, but it was obvious that she was rather nervous with all the attention on her. Cementus waved at her cheerily. Hello, Eri. Hi. Nezu took the reins to explain things. Ectoplasm and Cementus are here to help us get a better understanding of Eri's quirk. Ectoplasm's clones and Cementus's cement targets will allow Eri to use her quirk without risking someone's life. In the event that something goes wrong, Eraserhead will momentarily shut down Eri's quirk, so she can regain control. Tsukauchi and I will be here as support, All Might said with a grin. Although he'll be using this chance to get a quirk profile for Eri written up. Izuku knelt down next to Eri and took her hands. Do you think you're ready for this? She bit her lip and glanced at the teachers. No one is going to get hurt, right? Right, he smiled at her. I'll be here the whole time, too. Whenever you're ready, okay. Eri seemed to relax at that and nodded. I'll try. Cementus gestured for Eri to come over, creating a small, simple target for her to use as he did so. We'll start with me. The condition for Eri's quirk to activate on an object is that she must be touching it, correct? That's what I've seen, Izuku confirmed. We'll assume that to be the case, but some breathing room won't hurt, either, Aizawa decided. Everyone will remain 5 meters away from Eri when she activates her quirk. If I make the call to erase her quirk, I'll do so immediately and we'll discuss how to continue from there on. Can you actually do that in your condition? Izuku asked. Aizawa was, after all, mummified. The pro lifted one of his hands gingerly to expose his eyes from the bandages. It made him look weird, but they were the same, tired eyes as ever. I'll make do. Alright. Nezu clapped his hands. Pause. Whenever you're ready, Eri. You can begin anytime. Eri approached the concrete slab and looked around, making sure everyone was away from her before she tried to use her quirk. She squeezed her eyes shut and called on the power she'd always rejected before, placing her hands on the target. The teachers watched, on high alert, as her horn began to spark with energy. Slowly at first, but then it suddenly flared up, and the power rushed through Iri's body and into the concrete. Izuku had expected the concrete to get vaporized on the spot, so he was caught off guard when literally nothing happened. Iri frowned and tried to pour more into it, her horn still sparking with energy. She didn't get why it wasn't working, either. But it started to grow dangerously large, so Racer had activated his quirk for an instant and stopped the surge of power. Iri's horn ceased to spark, but the concrete appeared to be untouched. Izuku was puzzled by what had happened. Looking at the concrete block, it hadn't been altered at all, unlike the tree that had been atomized. If her quirk was molecular disintegration as he had assumed before, there would be nothing left of the cement. Why hadn't she been able to disintegrate it? Iri had no control of her quirk, so she was pouring the same amount of power into it this time that she had when she used it on the tree last week. Theoretically, it should have been vaporized just as it had been before. So what had changed? Well, the target wasn't vaporized, so we can safely assume her quirk isn't molecular disintegration. Cementus's voice jerked him out of his thoughts. Perhaps her quirk is limited to living things. Nezu prompted. Ectoplasm grunted. Let's try one of my clones and see if the effect is the same. It could be that a quirk's effect is dependent on if the target is biological or not. He opened his mouth, and from it came forth a stream of ectoplasm, which quickly formed into a clone of himself. Ectoplasm backed up and glanced at Iri. Try using your quirk on my clone this time. Iri frowned. It won't hurt. It won't, Ectoplasm promised. My clones aren't actually living things, but they're biological enough to pass as them. They'll disappear quickly enough on their own. They all gave Iri some space and waited as she readied herself to use her quirk. She got her horn sparking and then reached out hesitantly to touch the clone. They got the surprise of their lives when the clone melted back into raw ectoplasm. The glob of material splattered against the ground and turned into a puddle. It probably would have evaporated completely had Eraser had not stopped Iri's quirk again. I'm sorry. Iri gasped, eyes wide. I didn't mean to. It's alright, Ectoplasm assured her. You didn't do anything wrong. Izuku found himself at a loss for words. She'd reverted the clone back into pure ectoplasm. That had nothing to do with molecular disintegration. Just what was her quirk? Again, ectoplasm, Nezu ordered. Make a few of them this time. I need to watch a little more. Yes, sir. Ectoplasm opened his mouth and created 10 more clones for Iri to practice with. They watched as Iri activated a quirk for a third time, and began to touch the clones, one after another, and liquefied them each time. It happened faster and faster with each one she liquefied, making it clear that Iri just had her foot on the gas pedal, and was basically letting her quirk run wild. But as she went to touch the sixth clone, Izuku saw her wobble slightly on her feet. A moment later and she staggered, setting off alarm bells in his head. Mr. Aizawa, he exclaimed. Aizawa and the others had noticed too, so he immediately erased Iri's quirk, and the surge of energy dissipated. Izuku rushed forward as Iri slumped back and would have fallen over had he not caught her. Iri? Izuku shifted her so that she was sitting up and held one of his hands to her back. She was panting hard, beads of sweat forming on her skin. Her face was flushed and her eyes were a little glazed. Don't feel good. Izuku placed his free hand on her forehead softly and frowned. She was a bit too warm for his liking. I think you've got a fever. Ectoplasm approached them, observing Iri closely. It's possible that using too much of her power makes her ill. That's not uncommon with energy-type quirks. With all that energy focused on her horn, it makes sense that it'd produce enough heat to induce a fever given enough time. Her body isn't mature yet, so it's probably still adapting to her quirk, too, Cementus added. All Might jerked his thumb towards the door. In any case, let's get her to Recovery Girl for a checkup. There's no sense in chancing anything. The Recovery Girl held the thermometer up to Iri's mouth. Say ah. Iri, sitting on a bed in the older woman's office, glanced at Izuku for the okay, which he gave by nodding. She opened her mouth with a little ah, and presented the nurse with a chance to gently place the thermometer under her tongue. It was held there for a few seconds until the device began to beep, prompting the nurse to pull the thermometer from Iri. 99.8, Recovery Girl read off. She's got a mild fever, but she'll need to rest for the remainder of the day. Make sure she stays hydrated and gets something to eat as well. Okay, Inko, who had come to pick up Izuku and Iri after the training session, replied. She was worried when she found out they were in the nurse's office, though she could hardly say she was surprised. Izuku had been making a habit of visiting this place recently, a habit she hoped he would kick soon, instead of inviting Iri along for the ride. Well, it was early days yet. Of course there would be setbacks. You intend to keep training her in the use of her quirk, don't you? Recovery Girl asked the principal and assembled heroes behind him. When they nodded, she went on. Make sure you learn what her limit is quickly. If each session results in her getting a fever, I can't condone this training more than once a week. Weakening her body with sickness will have the opposite effect you're trying to achieve. You can add more sessions when you don't have to come by my office after one ends. Yes, ma'am. All Might saluted. He would much rather stay on her good side. Recovery Girl was a scary lady when she wanted to be. Also, she had needles. Lots of needles. Nezu had been quiet since they left the training dreamland, but now he broke his silence. I think that was just what I needed to discern the true nature of Iri's quirk. Eraserhead glanced at the principal. You figured something out. I believe so. Nezu's posture became contemplative, and it made Izuku recall that the principal's quirk, high spec, granted him incredible intelligence which surpassed that of humans. In the first instance where Iri has activated a quirk on an object, it was believed that she altered its state of matter, but had that been the case with ectoplasm's clone, it would have been vaporized or liquefied, not reverted to a prior state. Also, she is not able to affect something that is not alive, or at least biological enough to be considered a living thing. Thus I conclude that a quirk does not affect a living thing's state of matter, but rather its state of time. She can rewind an object's time, apparently to the point of atoms if she so chooses. I believe that is what happened to the trees she erased. In the case of ectoplasm's clones, she rewinds them into the raw substance they began in. As expected of you, sir, All Might praise Nezu. I never would have even thought of that. Tsukauchi was jotting the information down on his writing pad. A quirk that rewinds a living thing's state of time. Has that ever happened? There are quirks that stop aging or slow it down, Nezu recalled. But I myself have never heard of a quirk that rewinds one's state of time. It seems Iri has been gifted with a truly unique ability. Izuku was just trying to process that information. A quirk that could rewind objects, and apparently to a point before they even existed if enough power was used. That was incredible. If Iri could learn how to use her quirk in small increments, there was an incredible range of ways she could apply it. Today's lesson was for the sole purpose of identifying Iri's quirk and grasping how to approach her training in the future, the principal explained. Now that we know what her quirk does, we'll use that information to provide her with lessons that give her the opportunity to fine-tune and control it. Her quirk is still volatile as such. I don't feel it would be wise for us to continue within the limits of this premiere session. As Recovery Girls said, once a week is the limit right now, and that's absolutely fine. There's no need to rush, the best teaching is done with patience. Nezu smiled at Iri encouragingly. You did very well today, Iri. You and Izuku are dismissed now. Izuku offered the little girl a smile of his own. Ready to go home. She nodded and held her arms out, prompting Izuku to hoist her up and hold the girl against his chest, before he turned to the teachers. Thanks. I guess we'll see you tomorrow. That's right, Mr. Ozawa grunted. By the way, there's a pop quiz in class tomorrow. Izuku really hoped he was joking, but he made a mental note to text everyone just in case as he left UA with Iri and his mother. Ozawa wasn't exactly famous for jokes, after all. Ugh. Katsuki snarled at the after-game statistics screen on his laptop. They'd won the match, but his score was lower than he would have liked. Izuku rubbed his forehead in the seat beside him, also less than impressed with his scoring. They were off their game thanks to the announcement of the sports festival. The gaming competition they had would take place right after the event, so they had to train for the festival on top of keeping their gaming skills sharp. Iri, who was sitting next to Izuku and tucking into the dinner Inko had made, leaned over to the teen and whispered in his ear. What's he mad for? We didn't do so great, Izuku replied, frowning at the screen glumly. Didn't you win? She didn't understand the game, but she knew that whenever the word victory came up, it meant the boys won. They win pretty often, so it was weird to see them disappointed by it now. Yeah, but you can't just win, Izuku told her. In this game and even in heroics, you gotta push yourself way further to reach the top. It's not easy. You boys should probably call it a night, Inko suggested. You've been at it for hours now. Besides, it's almost time for Katsuki to head home. She was right and they knew it. Izuku leaned his head into his hands, trying to massage the oncoming headache he could tell was coming out of his temple. These next 3 weeks before the sports festival and gaming competition were going to be brutal. I can't stand this. Katsuki yelled, making everyone else in the kitchen jump. He grabbed Izuku by the arm and yanked him out of his seat and towards the door. Deku. We're going running. Wah, okay. Izuku yelped as he was dragged out of the apartment. Iri could only blink at the door Katsuki had dragged Izuku through a moment earlier, as she tried to process what had just happened. Why are they running? Probably to get all that pent-up energy out of their systems, Inko smiled, setting a gentle hand on Iri's shoulder. It was rare that Iri was left alone with someone other than Izuku, but she didn't mind being alone with Inko. The woman was sweet and calming for the little girl. They both have to work very hard, so when it gets to be a bit much, they find a way to relieve all that stress. More often than not, they go running or work out some other way. Iri frowned. That didn't make any sense. Why run or work out if they were already tired? That's kinda weird, she decided aloud. Inko laughed, prompting the little girl to smile. Yes, it can be. Now, let's get you into your bath, little missy. By the time Izuku gets back, he's going to be very sweaty and smelly. You don't want to take a bath after he does. That made Iri giggle, and the peals of laughter coming from her made Inko hope that maybe, just maybe, she was going to recover from her ordeal sooner than later. Izuku ran after Katsuki for the better part of an hour around town, until they finally took a break. As they leaned over with their hands on their knees, sweating and panting for breath, Izuku realized that their run had taken them to the same beach he cleaned up nearly a year ago with all might. The sun had already set, but the starlight provided enough lighting for them to see clearly enough, in addition to the street lamps dotted here and there on the sidewalk lining the beach itself. There was no one else around for the time being, not even the usual couples that had been using the place as a popular dating spot. Katsuki took in a huge gulp of air, and practically tore off his top with a growl. Damn, it's starting to get hot outside again. It wouldn't be long before summer, after all, Izuku panted, also shedding his drenched shirt. Phew, Katsuki blew out some air as he finally caught his breath. He was quiet for a moment, but then started to speak. Are you worried about the sports festival? Well yeah, but you are too, right? He huffed. Not like you. You scared of people seeing your quirk, aren't you? Izuku stiffened. Is it that obvious? Idiot. I know you too well, Katsuki muttered, turning towards the ocean waves as they lapped at the shoreline. You can't hide like that from me. The green-haired teen glanced at his hand, clenching it into a fist. Honestly, yeah. I'm scared out of my mind. There's no way I'm going to be able to win without giving it my all, but I'll have to use my quirk's full strength to fight you and the others. There'll be thousands of people watching and it's gonna be broadcast live. The whole country might see my quirk for what it really is. Someone is gonna recognize it and call me out. It doesn't matter what the small fry think, Katsuki snapped back. None of them matter as long as you reach the top. Izuku smiled at that. He had a point, though it didn't alleviate any of his fears. Plus, I'm going to kick everyone's asses and steal the show, so they'll probably forget about your quirk, Katsuki went on, a large grin forming on his face. They're gonna find out they should be way more scared of me than they should be of you. Izuku's sweat dropped. Is he trying to encourage me or insult me? Katsuki suddenly turned around to look at Izuku, his mouth set in a line and his eyes sharp. Use your quirk. Eh? Use your quirk, Katsuki ordered again. Right here. Turn the flames on high and let me see it. Izuku protested. Katsuki, someone might see. I don't give F, the other teen growled. But, Izuku glanced around nervously. There wasn't anyone around, but still. Right there. You ain't gonna be able to fight at full throttle if you keep freezing up like this, Katsuki muttered. The teen lifted one hand and scratched the back of his head for a moment, thinking. How about this? I'll say something to make you chill out, then you turn the flames on. How the heck are you gonna make me chill out? I'm trying to help, damn it. Think of it like a trigger phrase or something, but in a good way. Something that helps you get past your nerves. Izuku frowned. But, how could you make me settle down enough to? I'm not scared of you. The words made Izuku's eyes go wide. He felt the breath leave his lungs as he stared at Katsuki, who shoved his hands into his pockets, and just looked at Izuku steadily. I'm not scared of you. What? Don't think about it, Katsuki interrupted. Don't try to figure it out like you do with everything else. Just focus and settle down. Izuku gulped and squeezed his eyes shut. It was a little easier to focus with his eyes closed, allowing the dark to calm his nerves. I say it again, please. I'm not scared of you. The words flowed over his ears and somehow, Izuku found it easier to just breathe. Like they removed a weight from his shoulders. He felt so very calm. An emerald fire wreathed itself around him. He opened his eyes slowly and looked at Katsuki, who was studying the flames. Katsuki shook his head slowly, a perplexed expression on his face. What the hell about this is so scary, anyways, geez, people really are idiots. I don't get them at all. I'm not scared of you, Katsuki repeated at last. Your fire doesn't scare me at all. But he could say that, even while looked at the green fire and the flowing fiery horns atop Izuku's head, brought the boy such a sense of relief that he couldn't even express himself with words. Thank you. Katsuki snorted. Don't start crying on me. I'll give you something to cry about for real if you do. Izuku laughed, wiping his eyes to prevent any tears from leaving the ducts. I won't. Good. Now turn the barbecue off and let's get home. I'm starving again, damn it. Today was the day. The last 3 weeks had been crazy. Between training for the sports festival and preparing for their upcoming video game competition, Izuku and Katsuki had been practically living together. They worked themselves to the point of exhaustion until yesterday, when Katsuki's mother had sent them packing to their own The two looked like zombies, vacuum had snapped, sweat dropping at the sight of the two exhausted teens, pretty much the moment they got home from school. Go to bed already. You'll be useless tomorrow if you don't sleep. She had driven Izuku home and told Inko in no uncertain terms that he and Katsuki needed to sleep. Inko had been at home with Eri all day, since she was tired from training the day before. When Bakuman quite literally dragged him into the apartment, Inko sent him straight to bed, and Eri volunteered to make sure he got to his room. Needless to say, Izuku passed out the second he hit the bed and slept all night long. Thankfully, the extra sleep was just what he needed, and he woke up feeling refreshed and ravenous. Inko was cooking up breakfast when he finally woke, Eri sprawled over his torso and snoring peacefully. He stretched with a groan, feeling his joints pop pleasantly. The motion stirred Eri, but she only blinked at him sleepily for a few moments before gripping his t-shirt with her hands and letting out a whine. Izuku smiled at the sleepy child. Breakfast time, Eri. He could literally smell the cinnamon rolls from here, and the scent had him inwardly drooling. Eri only pouted and gripped his shirt tighter. Don't wanna. What if I carry you? Ma. That counts as a yes, he decided aloud, hugging her close to him as he rolled out of bed and stood up. Izuku shifted her so that she had her arms wrapped around his neck, making it easier to carry her. Inko was waiting for them in the kitchen and surprisingly Katsuki and Mitsuki vacuumed him. Inko smiled at the pair. There's our two sleepyheads. I was about to ask Katsuki to wake you up. Mitsuki snickered at the sight of Izuku carrying a half-comatose Eri. Getting an early start learning parenthood, eh? Izuku reddened and his mother made it worse. Being a good dad is important, you know. Lots of women find that an attractive quality. Steam began to pour from Izuku's face, making Mitsuki and Katsuki cackle. Inko merely giggled and Eri remained mostly asleep, blissfully unaware of her guardian's embarrassment. Mitsuki turned her attention to Katsuki. What are you laughing at? You're just as guilty. You and Izuku spend more time with Eri than anyone else, you one of daddy. Katsuki sneered at her. No way, I'm obviously her awesome uncle, you old hag. Weird little brat. Middle-aged, wench. Is breakfast done? Izuku stammered. Inko was still smiling from ear to ear. Yes. You two better eat up. The two boys dug in while Inko managed the kitchen, and Mitsuki did her best to get the teenagers riled up. That meant taunting them with stuff she knew would drive Katsuki crazy, and make Izuku turn shades of red that most people wouldn't be capable of. But it set a tone of normalcy for the pair, and kept their minds occupied. Eri slowly woke up from the promise of food and continuous banter of Mitsuku and the teens. Izuku hadn't moved her from his lap since she had been so sleepy, so she remained there and snacked on his breakfast. He didn't mind he'd filled his plate up and there were lots of extras. Heck, Katsuki occasionally snagged something from Izuku's plate if he really wanted it. Izuku couldn't get away with taking Katsuki's food, though. Only Eri could get away with that. When breakfast was done and the boys had to leave, Inko, Mitsuki, and Eri saw them off at the door. Be safe, okay? Inko said with a smile, but there was a worried crease on her forehead. We'll be watching everything on TV, Mitsuki added. Miseru is gonna join us later. He just wanted to pop into the office early so he could take some time off for the event. Katsuki grunted. Sure thing. Eri stepped forward and held her arms out at Izuku. He knelt down and hugged her, squeezing the little girl gently. Good luck. Thanks, Izuku smiled back gently. When they pulled apart, Eri looked at Katsuki shyly. I don't need luck, Katsuki told her. I'm gonna win the whole thing, anyways. Eri bit her lip and frowned, glancing from Katsuki to Izuku and back again. Can you both win? Mitsuki laughed. Of course they can. They'll both win first place. Katsuki looked like he wanted to correct her, but he paused at the smile on her face. It was wide, innocent, and devoid of any sign of mercy. That was Bakuman's happy murder smile. If you correct me I am going to kill you so dead you won't even know you died smile. Even Katsuki knew to fear that smile. He wisely kept his mouth shut. Class 1A was milling around in their waiting room at the big stadium on UA's campus, waiting impatiently for the event to begin. The check-in for outside visitors had been going on for hours, not that surprising, given that the school had just been attacked by villains. But the security check was almost over and they knew that any minute now. Everyone. Have you prepared yourselves? Tenya suddenly opened the door and shouted. We'll be leaving in just a moment. Izuku sucked in a deep breath as his heart began to pound wildly. Izuku. The boy jumped at the calm, deeper voice of his classmate. Shoto had never gone out of his way to talk to him before, so it startled Izuku that he would do so now. Why yes. Can I have a word? In private. Oh, but we're about to. It won't take long. Well, okay, he managed, then quietly followed Shoto out of the waiting room and down the hall. They turned a corner and stopped there. Shoto studied him in silence for a moment or two. From an objective standpoint, I think I'm probably stronger than you. You why yeah, That being said, you've got an unusual flame. Izuku froze, but remained silent, waiting for Shoto to go on. You know my father is Endeavor, right? He's been the #2 hero for a while now. What most people don't know is before that, he took on a certain criminal, and lost spectacularly. In the end, All Might had to step in and defeat the villain in Endeavor's place. The funny thing is, Quirk is a lot like that villain's. Like heat vipers. Izuku's blood turned to ice in his veins. He knows. Well, maybe that's an overstatement, Shoto said with a shrug. Quirk might be similar, but from what I can tell, you're incapable of causing mass destruction on the same scale as that villain. But it's similar enough, even if it's just bad luck on your part. Heat Viper's flame commanded all others. Endeavor was stupid enough to challenge him with a fire quirk, and you lost without even touching him. Your quirk seems to resemble something like that with how you can absorb other flames, even if it's not exactly the same, but that's fine with me. You remember how I said during class introductions that I would never use my left side? Against you, I'll make an exception. What? Izuku squeaked. He was already rattled and now Shoto pulled this. Why? I hate my old man, Shoto said. I don't really want to disclose why to someone I barely know, but I'll tell you that much. He hates it whenever someone brings up his defeat against Heat Viper. Your quirk is probably close enough to remind him of it, and I'm going to crush that power like he never could. Just seeing the look on his face would be worth it. Shoto began to walk off. Sorry, but I've got no intention of getting friendly with anyone in the class. At least fight back enough to give that bastard a show. That's, Izuku feebly protested. He was shaking to his core. Shoto didn't know he'd struck the nail on the head, and then he'd gone and upped the ante even more. It was too much. However, as Shoto turned the corner, he found himself face to face with 1AS resident Bombing King. Katsuki glared at him. Are you finally done spilling your guts? Eavesdropping, huh? Shoto's eyes narrowed. Somehow I'm not surprised. Really? This is me caring, Katsuki sneered. Now F off. Shoto shoved his hands into his pockets and walked past the volatile teen, evidently irritated. Katsuki watched him go for a second before turning the corner to find that Izuku had slid down the wall to sit on the floor. The green-haired teen was taking a few deep breaths to calm himself. Thanks, Izuku managed weakly. Don't be, I'm not going to hold your hand through this, Katsuki muttered. He was just going over my limit. Still. I don't know if I can do this, Izuku blurted suddenly. He felt sick to his stomach, and it was a little too hard to breathe. Katsuki's eyes narrowed, and he mentally slapped every bullseye he had onto Shoto. He knew Izuku better than almost anyone else, and he knew damn well when the timid boy was about to completely lose his cool. Of course, that wasn't to say that it was all Shoto's fault. Izuku had already been rattled by the very idea of this event, but Icy Hot had more or less set him off. Katsuki. We gotta go. That was Ijiro calling to him from down the hall. I got it, give me a sec, Katsuki shouted back. He walked a little closer to Izuku so that he was out of sight of anyone else, and dropped to sit on his heels. Do you need recovery, girl? He asked quietly. Izuku gulped and closed his eyes, taking a few deep breaths to try and steady himself. He started to feel a little less shaky after a moment, and let his head fall back against the wall. I think I'm okay. Katsuki studied him for a few more seconds before he nodded shortly and stood back up, offering a hand to the other teen. Izuku took it and stood with Katsuki's help. Just try and chill out, Katsuki told him. The crowd isn't gonna try and pick you out, you know. Don't think about it and just focus on winning. I know, Izuku took one more deep breath and exhaled. He offered Katsuki a shaky smile. I'll be fine. Really. He wasn't buying that. Not for a second was Katsuki buying that. But calling Izuku out right now would only make him freak out again, so, for the time being, he'd play along. But Katsuki slapped him on the back and then led the meek teenager after the rest of their class. Are you ready? President Mick's voice was answered by the roar of thousands of people in the Colosseum, all eager to get the event underway. The pro laughed from the announcer's box and continued to rile up the crowds. Welcome to the UA Sports Festival, audience. Gather round, mass media. It's the biggest event of the year. The newest, youngest hero candidates are about to run wild and go at each other to claim that spot at the top. It's time to meet our contestants this year. Coming out now is the highlight class of the first years. The students who fought off villains in their first week of training. This is Hero Class 1A. The students all walked out together amidst the roaring crowd, each of them trying to keep their nerves under control. Well, most of them were. Some, like Katsuki and Shoto, were either raring to go or just didn't care. Holy crap, Izuku thought with a gulp. It felt like the Colosseum was shaking from an earthquake, but it was all from the screaming crowds. Next up. They haven't been getting as much airtime, but this class is full of talent too. Hero Class 1B enters the stage. Following our hero course is General Studies classes 1C, 1D, and 1E. The support course classes 1F, 1G, and 1H are here too. And last but not least, the business course classes 1I, 1J, and 1K. All of UA's first years have now arrived. The mass of students all gathered on the field in front of a podium, upon which stood the pro hero, Midnight, adored. Izuku dryly noticed that Minoru seemed like he was about to dehydrate himself from all the drool leaving his mouth. The way he looked at Midnight was just gross. Katsuki noticed too, and opted to remove one half of a bullseye from Shoto, and slapped it onto the PAL in question. Apparently, he had not yet learned his lesson. Midnight cracked a Flogger-style whip to silence the crowd and get the attention of the students. Quiet, everyone. It's time for the player's pledge. Representing the first years as a whole is Katsuki Bakugo from Class 1A. Izuku whipped towards Katsuki, who just strolled towards the podium. Well, he did get first place in the entrance exam, Hanta admitted. A loud huff made the boys turn their heads towards a couple of students from the General Studies class. They looked rather irritated as one of them retorted in annoyance. Only in the hero course. Izuku cringed away from the obvious venom. Ijiro sighed uneasily. It's obvious she hates our guts. Isn't that mostly Katsuki's fault anyways? Denki asked. Katsuki made it to the top of the podium and paused in front of the mic. The mass of students and watching crowds waiting in silence for several seconds before he opened his mouth. I pledge, Katsuki drawled, that I'll be number 1. Virtually every member of 1A mentally screamed. I knew he'd say something like that. The rest of the first years were outright pissed. What the hell? Stop messing around. Don't be so full of yourself, 1A. You sledge bastard. Tenya started chopping his arms at Katsuki like a short-circuiting robot. Why would you be so disrespectful? You're representing us all. Katsuki kept a straight face, but his expression visibly darkened a moment later. Sorry, but you've got the wrong idea. This ain't a pledge, it's a declaration of war to all the classes. I'm not losing to any of you, hero course or otherwise. And especially not to some entitled brat with a third-rate fire quirk and a loser dad who never gets first place. An epic silence filled the entirety of the stadium as they processed that statement. Izuku felt all the blood drain from his face. Did he just? Katsuki turned around back to the mass of students and glared at Shoto, then stuck his thumb towards the ground. Both of you can go sit in the corner like the background characters you are. Oh? F. Katsuki walked off the podium then, not giving even a single about the utter havoc he left in his wake. He shoved his hands into his pockets and stood in silence next to Izuku, who stared at his best friend, as though he were a live grenade just seconds from exploding. Wee! Present Mick exclaimed, bringing the crowds back to life. You can really feel the tension after that. Talk about bold. Midnight, get things going already. I wanna see the bloodbath. With pleasure, Midnight was grinning wildly. Let's get things started right away. This first game is what you'd call a qualifier for the later rounds. Many drink their tears here. And the first game is... A large hologram screen popped up behind Midnight, upon which was a whizzing list of potential games not unlike a slot machine. The pro hero cracked her whip, and the list stopped dead on a game titled Obstacle Race, that Midnight immediately began to explain. The Obstacle Race. All 11 classes will participate in this race. The course will be the outer circumference of this stadium, about 4 kilometers. She cracked her whip again, and the smile on her face took on a hint of something sadistic. Our school's selling point is freedom. As long as you stay on the course, it doesn't matter what you do. Now everyone, take your places. The mass of students crowded around the exit of the Colosseum, all of them tense and ready to go as soon as the bell sounded 3 times. Izuku swallowed hard. This was it. 1 ring. He jumped as he felt a fist lightly bump on his shoulder, followed by an unusually quiet Katsuki amidst the silence of the stadium. I'm not scared of you, he muttered. So don't go and lose here. 2 rings. Unwillingly, a small smile found its place on Izuku's face. I won't. 3 rings. Start, shouted Midnight. Immediately, chaos ensued. Alright, here's the play-by-play. Mick laughed crazily. Are you ready for the commentary, mummy man? A tired and irritated sounding Aizawa was heard speaking right after Mick. You're the one who forced me to come. Let's get started, mummy man. What should we pay attention to in the early stages? This part right now. Every single student was trying to rush through the relatively tight exit, packing them all together, and making it nearly impossible to get out. The tunnel acted like a choke point, preventing anyone but the leaders from making progress. Like that stopping me. Katsuki grinned savagely and lowered his hands, then unleashed a stream of rapid explosions to make him fly above the crowd. Izuku spread one for all throughout his body, then let his feet catch fire before he leapt for the walls, bouncing back and forth with his flames and enhanced strength. Katsuki was ahead of him since he was going in a straight line, but they both made it over the swarm of students in a matter of seconds. They made it out just in time to avoid a blast of ice that smothered the ground and trapped many of the students behind them by their feet. Izuku glanced over his shoulder, unsurprised to see Shoto skating over the ice after them. However, not every student was caught by the flash freeze. Yuga, Momo, Ichiro, and Masharao easily leapt over the wave of ice. That's too naive, Shoto. Momo yelled after him. Shoto didn't look too surprised that most of the students who avoided his attack were from 1A. Although he had to admit, he was a little impressed that many other students from the other classes managed to get through with only minimal trouble. They're steadily making their way through the first part of the course, Mick exclaimed. And just ahead of them is the first obstacle. Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto all stopped dead as the earth beneath their feet shook. A moment later, several of the huge zero-point robots from the entrance exam appeared in their path, blocking the road. Their pause gave the students behind them a chance to catch up, only to find that they had a much bigger problem on their hands. Robo Inferno. Denki's jaw dropped. The zero-pointers from the exam. 9, 10, 11, Kyoka bit her lip as she counted them. Geez, there's over a dozen of them. This is what they used in the general entrance exam. Momo wondered aloud as she stared at the steel monsters. Where did you get the resources for this? The lead robot lunged at them, one of its giant arms swinging down at the mass of students. Shoto's eyes narrowed as he built up a massive amount of power in his right side, his ice half. If they went through all this trouble, I wish they would have prepared something better. Since my old man is watching. The temperature around Shoto dropped incredibly quick, then he swiped his left hand towards the robot, unleashing a literal glacier at the steel colossus, and freezing it instantly mid-blow. The sheer mass of ice was astounding, so much so that Izuku found his eyes growing white in shock. He'd known the Shoto was powerful, given that he was one of only 2 recommended students in 1A, and from how easily he'd won in combat training, but this was on a completely different level. Whether it was the upper limit of his power or not, Izuku wasn't sure, but he was willing to bet it was up there. Shoto began to run through the robot's legs, intending to exit out on the other side. He knew the mass of steel would fall over in just a few moments, but he wasn't expecting to hear a loud bang above him. He whipped his eyes up in time to see Katsuki go airborne just above the robot's head. The explosive teen roared down at Shoto as he pointed his right hand at the frozen robot, holding the same arm with his other hand. I told you to sit down. Izuku yelled as Katsuki unleashed a horrifyingly large explosion, blowing the frozen robot into smithereens. Comets of ice and steel began to rain down on Shoto, stopped only by another rapid burst of ice from the teenager. Shoto was saved from being crushed, but he ended up blocking his own path as a result of that. Izuku seized the chance to leap over the frozen chunks of robot with his all-flare and one-for-all combo, getting ahead of Shoto and the rest of the student body again. That put him between the clamoring students behind him and over a dozen angry robots ahead. Fortunately, Izuku had realized that the robots were actually really slow. They were huge, and if you got hit, of course you'd be incapacitated, but it was easy to avoid them once you got a grasp on their range of motion and speed. He caught up to Katsuki after jumping over the robots, landing safely on the ground once more to run after his friend. Katsuki, wasn't that too much? You could have killed him. Shut up. Katsuki retorted, shaking the pain out of his right arm. It was gonna fall over anyway. Plus he's pissing me off. That's my line. The 2 teens whipped their heads over their shoulders just in time to see Shoto rushing at them on a stream of ice. The normally stoic boy was scowling after them. You're starting to get on my nerves. Check it out. Class 1A's Katsuki, Izuku, and Shoto are in the lead. They cleared the first obstacle so easily. But they better watch out. Izuku realized after a second that Fumikage, Hanta, and Kyoka were right behind them. Not far behind, Tenya, Momo, Denki, Achako, and Minu were catching up, along with a whole group that consisted mostly of 1A students, several 1Bs and a few others. The leaders are being hunted down. Those giant robots were small fry for the first year's golden eggs. Mick shouted excitedly. Well, those robots might be big and scary, but they're just dumb hunks of metal. If you watch for a few moments, you'll start to see openings. That was Aizawa, who sounded almost bored. Stop getting in my way. Shoto snapped as he shot a blast of ice after Katsuki. Katsuki leapt above the ice with an explosion and sneered back. Look at that. I finally made you mad. I'm gonna blow you into smithereens, icy hot. He fired another blast at Shoto, who blocked with a shield of ice. Izuku yelled and dove for the ground to avoid the chunks of ice that went flying everywhere as a result. And while you 3 are busy trying to kill each other. Izuku's head whipped up in surprise as Kyoka rushed past them in a sprint. I'll be taking the lead, thanks. Hey. Get the hell back here. Katsuki roared, forgetting Shoto in favor of chasing after her. Aha. Finally, a girl in first place. Katsuki's pupils shrank at the voice. His PAL senses were tingling. It's time for my special move, Minori declared, throwing purple spheres along the ground and bouncing off of them to close the distance to the lead. He finally grabbed a pair of spheres and held them in each hand as he flew towards Kyoka. Kyoka saw him coming over her shoulder and blanched. Don't you dare. I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone, Minori cried with glee. Gripru. Eee. Katsuki launched himself upwards with another blast, and drove a ruthless kick into Minori's balls. A sonic boom roared out as Minori was punted up high into the sky, where he disappeared with a glimmer of light. Oh my god. Mick screamed in horror. I felt that just watching. How cruel. Stop screwing around, Aizawa deadpanned. Kyoka grinned over her shoulder. I owe you one, Katsuki. Get back behind me, heartthrob. He snarled after her as he came down to earth. Not gonna happen. Whoa. Kyoka, stop. Ijiro yelled as he caught up with the pack. Kyoka screamed as her feet suddenly found empty air, and she realized she had just run over a sheer cliff. Only Hanta grabbing her with his tape and yanking her back saved her from falling. Oops, Kyoka managed as she sat down hard, staring at the black abyss below them. It's the second obstacle. The fall. How are they gonna get through this one? The fall was an enormous pit with tall spires of rock jutting out of it, each attached to others like it by long tendrils of rope. Many of the students stopped at the front to figure out how to approach it, giving the runners in the back a chance to catch up. Whoa, Ichako stared at the blackness with wide eyes. When did they make this? It was probably powered loader, Izuku muttered as he studied the spires of rock. It's no big deal if you just fly over. Katsuki snapped, launching himself back into the air with explosions. Kyoka yelled after him. Hey, get back here with my first place. Not gonna happen. Katsuki mimicked her earlier taunt with a cackle, while Kyoka waved her fist after him and yelled some more. Shoto walked to one of the ropes and fired himself across the abyss on a stream of ice, glaring after Katsuki in silence. Izuku realized that most of the spires had relatively wide platforms, meaning it'd be easy to land on if he jumped. They also weren't spaced too far apart, despite the sheer depth and length of the pit. He crouched, spreading one for all through his body again, and set his feet alight. I'm coming after you. Izuku began to leap to the rock spires, carefully gauging his landings and pausing at each one, so that his momentum would carry him too far. I guess great minds think alike. Izuku whipped his head around in surprise as Tsuyu landed on a spire nearby. Her frog-like powers made it a simple task. He was so surprised that he tripped as he landed and fell on his butt, but thankfully didn't go over the edge. Ow. Don't stop now, Izuku. They're catching up. Tsuyu shouted as she leapt ahead of him. Izuku looked over his shoulder and realized she was right. Steadily, the other students were beginning to cross the abyss with ease. I'm not gonna lose, Izuku told himself, getting back up and jumping again. Katsuki and Shoto had already made it to the other side. He made it to the other side and began running again, keeping both quirks active so that he could travel faster. Before long he reached the final blockade, which Katsuki and Shoto had begun to navigate. Present Mick cackled wildly. It's the last obstacle. This one is called Danger Mines. Look out kiddies, it's a minefield. If you look close enough, you can see where the mines are, but they're everywhere. You better be careful. By the way, these mines aren't strong enough to seriously hurt you, but they're loud and flashy enough to make you piss your pants. That depends on the person, Aizawa retorted dryly. But what the heck, the two leaders are already halfway across. They're making this obstacle look easy. That was the understatement of the century. Katsuki was flying across the landmines, and Shoto was leaving a frozen trail in his wake as he rushed on foot. The pair of teens were fighting as they went, sending blasts and bursts of ice at each other, in an effort to trip the other up. Izuku grit his teeth in frustration. They were moving so fast, he wasn't sure if he would be able to catch up in time. Crap. I can't just jump carelessly, but I have to get ahead of them. Izuku thought, racking his brain for a solution. Out of desperation, he finally decided on an idea. I didn't want to do this if I could avoid it, but I've got no choice. He crouched low and let one for all build up in one of his toes, simultaneously generating as much fire as he could from his feet to disguise the power-up. Pumping 100% of one for all into his toe, he let the energy free in an enormous blast. The force sent him sky high and launched him across the minefield. He sailed over Katsuki and Shoto, who whipped their heads up in total surprise. Why had Izuku Midoriya just jumped most of the minefield? Wait no, he cleared it in one go. Heads up, mass media. It's the kind of development you love. Izuku landed on the other side well, it was more like a crash and a scramble to get back on his feet, and began to run like hell. His toe was shattered and it hurt badly, but the adrenaline running through his system from the shock managed to dull the pain enough for him to ignore it. He ran as fast as he could, reaching the tunnel that led back into the Colosseum, and desperately trying to stay ahead of the sound of explosions and ice rushing along the ground. The leaders have arrived back in the Colosseum. In first place is the unexpected powerhouse of Class 1A. Izuku Midoriya just made a huge splash. Izuku made it out into the other side and slowed to a stop, gasping for breath and wincing at the pain in his left foot. He leaned on his right, taking the weight off his foot and lightening the pain some. Around him were the screaming crowds in the Colosseum, roaring at the top of their lungs, and making the arena shake like an earthquake. It didn't really sink in until he looked up into the stands at the VIP section, where All Might was sitting and clapping for him, that it clicked. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. I won. Tears started flowing from his eyes out of joy, but Izuku quickly tried to wipe them away, as Katsuki made it just behind Shoto, and jogged to a stop. The more volatile of the two teenagers panted and staggered past Izuku, eyes smoldering. Izuku had caught his breath and glanced at his friend nervously. Gee, good job, Katsuki. Whatever, Katsuki growled, stalking by without so much as looking at him. Izuku sighed, but he wasn't surprised. Katsuki hated losing, even if it was to Izuku. He was going to be sore about that for a little while. On top of that, he was pissed that Shoto had pulled ahead at the last second. Only first place would satisfy Katsuki. Anything less than that was garbage. Shoto had his hands set on his hips as he caught his breath, steam rising from his right side to cool his body off. He looked at Izuku, trying to contain the frustration of defeat within him. He took advantage of my fighting with Katsuki and passed us both up in an instant. I let my guard down, I won't let that happen again. They're finishing one after another. We'll make a list of the results later, but for now, good job kids. Go take a break and see Recovery Girl if you have to. President Mick declared. Deku. That was amazing. Izuku turned around and froze in surprise as Ochako ran up to him, gasping for breath. She clenched her fists tightly and shook them a little in mixed frustration and excitement. First place is awesome, but it's so frustrating that I lost. Izuku's face turned red from the proximity, and did his best to hide by curling his arms around his head. It was just luck. Pain spiked through his foot as he shuffled away from Ochako, causing him to wince. She noticed immediately from the expression on his face. Are you okay? I am fine, he replied, starting to limp towards the side of the arena to reach Recovery Girl's temporary office. I just hurt my foot with that last jump. Is it bad? Ochako asked, alarmed by the limp. She rushed over and started to help him walk. Let's get you to Recovery Girl. Izuku felt like he was going to explode from the amount of blood gathering in his face. She's so close. Forget Katsuki or Shoto, Ochako was gonna be the one who killed him in this competition. What do you think, teacher? Asked Tomoura Shigaraki, glancing at the man sitting in the chair directly in front of the screen. Tomoura himself was standing behind the chair as they watched the UA Sports Festival on the television. Something is different, teacher said, perplexed for once. He was utterly intrigued by the child Tomoura had pointed out, the one who scored first place in the obstacle course. There's something about this boy, something more than his flames. What do you mean? For now, just continue to watch, teacher replied. He would be paying very close attention to the one Tomoura wanted, as well as any other students that he felt had the potential to be turned to his will. After all, he will be your rival before he becomes your weapon. Observe him closely and learn, Tomoura. The first round is finally over, Midnight announced. Now, let's take a look at the results. The hologram screen behind her lit up with a list of students who had made it into the second round. It included the first 42 students, the last of which was. How the hell did he make it in? Kyoka wondered aloud. He crawled, hand to deadpan, eyeing the form of Minoru still clutching at his balls on the ground. If you didn't make the cut, don't worry about it, Midnight told the mass of students. There will be other chances for you to shine. The real competition begins now. The press cavalry will be all over it. She cracked her whip as the slot machine began moving again. Now then, here's the next game. I already know what it is, but what could it be? I just said it, and now here it is. The slot machine came to a sudden stop and revealed the title of the game. Cavalry Battle. I'll explain, Midnight went on, turning towards the screen. A picture came up of 13, present Mick and Cementus holding up All Might between the three of them. The participants can form teams of 2 to 4 people as they wish. It's basically the same as a regular cavalry battle, but there's one little difference. Based on the results of the obstacle race, each person has been assigned a point value. Ochako nodded in understanding. So in other words, each team will have a different amount of points depending on who they're with. That's easy enough to understand, Mina grinned. Midnight cracked her whip again in frustration, startling them. You guys don't hold back even though I'm the one talking, huh, but yeah, that's right. And the points assigned go up by 5 starting from the bottom. 5 points for 42nd place, 10 for 41st, and so on. With the exception of first place, whose value is 10 million. Izuku felt like every single atom of hope had just fled and left him in a cold abyss of horror. The eyes of every student around him glowed red like demons as they stared at him greedily, knowing that the points he had would basically guarantee them a spot at the top no matter what. By now, Izuku was 99.9% positive that this place was going to be his grave. Midnight grinned sadistically. You got it. It's survival of the fittest with a shot for those at the bottom to seize the top. Good luck, Mr. First Place. Tell me now, Izuku managed to squeak. Izuku. Inko was still crying in joy after realizing that her son had managed to get first place in the obstacle course race. She hadn't been able to tear her eyes from the screen the entire time. Mitsuki snickered as she passed her friend another tissue. That's gonna drive Katsuki nuts. He never takes losing very well. Does that mean he's a won? Iri asked, fidgeting with nervous excitement. He won the first event, Mitsuki explained to her with a smile. The UA Sports Festival is split up into 3 different events. The first this year was the obstacle course race that Izuku won. The second event is going to be this cavalry battle thing. To win the tournament, someone has to make it through the first obstacle course in cavalry battle, then win the final event. Oh, she replied. She didn't fully understand that, but she understood that Izuku still had stuff to do. What's he gotta do now? Midnight is about to explain the rules, so. Anyone home? Eri squeaked as the front door opened and was followed by an unfamiliar, male voice. She took cover behind Inko, who stopped crying just long enough to see who it was. Mitsuki's husband, Misaru, walked into the living room with a box in his hand. I brought pizza. Oh, good timing. Mitsuki grinned. They're about to explain the rules of the second game. How'd our boys do? He asked. Inko started crying in joy again. Izuku. Misaru glanced from Inko to his wife. Is it a good or a bad thing? Good. Mitsuki cackled. Izuku took first place. Katsuki got in third. Misaru blinked in surprise. Really? Wow, that's great. Eri was still hiding behind Inko as she stared at Masaru anxiously. While she'd met Mitsuki before, Masaru was unfamiliar to her. He was usually still at work the few times she came by the Bakugo residence. Masaru took notice of Eri after a few moments when he started passing out the pizza on paper plates. Masaru, this is Eri. The one Katsuki and Izuku saved a few weeks ago from that villain, remember? Mitsuki prompted. Oh? Masaru exclaimed, scratching the back of his head in slight embarrassment. That's right, I can't believe that slipped my mind. Well, hi there, Eri. I'm Masaru, Katsuki's father. Eri tried to smile just a little, but she didn't come out from her hiding place behind Inko. She would probably have felt more comfortable if Izuku was around, but he wasn't, and so she wasn't as open as she might have been. Masaru glanced at Mitsuki again in question. The woman grinned in Eri's direction a little softly. She's a bit shy, but she opens up more when Izuku is with her. I see, Masaru nodded, opting to pass a couple of plates to Inko, who was still crying tears of joy. She took them gratefully and gave one of the plates to Eri, which held upon it a piece of pizza. Alright, it's gonna start soon, Mitsuki said, gluing her eyes to the TV as she took a bite of pizza. Midnight cracked her whip once more to get everyone's attention, mostly, away from Izuku and his 10 million points. Listen up, kiddies. The time limit of the game is 15 minutes. As I said before, the point value of each team will be the total amount of everyone on the team, written down on a headband. The rider of each horse will be the one to wear it, like a flag bearer. Your goal is to steal as many headbands as you can until the time is up. You're restricted to wearing your headband on your neck or above, but no lower. Also, if you should lose your headband, you won't be out of the game. You can use your quirks, but remember that this is still a human cavalry game. If you attack any other group with the intent of breaking them up, that's a red card, and you'll be forced to sit out for the rest of the game. And starting now, Midnight grinned. You've got 15 minutes to pick out the members of your team. Izuku had already been thinking about which people he wanted on his team from the moment the game was announced, so he immediately approached the first person he had in mind, Tenya. He called to his friend to get his attention. Tenya, can we team up? I've got a plan, but I'll need you and Chako to pull it off. With the two of you, we'll have high mobility and I can manage defenses with my fire. As expected of you, Izuku, Tenya praised him. You clearly have a strategy planned for this event. However, I must decline. Eh? The thing is, ever since the entrance exam, I've done nothing but lose to you. You're an amazing friend, but if I only follow you, I'll never grow myself. Katsuki and Shoto aren't your only rivals, you know. So I'll be doing my best to defeat you. His decision surprised Izuku for a few moments, but it made sense. He was the one everyone was gunning for. He was the target. The mountain. So this was what All Might felt. Deku. Izuku turned towards the familiar voice to see a huge smile he wasn't ready for. Let's team up. Chako. Izuku cried in joy, streams of tears literally pouring from his eyes. Are you serious? Everyone is gonna be after me because of my stupid 10 million points. Yeah, it's gonna be rough, she admitted, blinding him with her cheerful face. But I'd rather team up with people I'm friends with. Izuku felt his heart thump painfully against his ribcage, causing his face to scrunch up. Are you okay? Chako asked with legitimate concern. Your face got kinda. It's nothing, you're just so bright I can't look at you directly. Izuku recovered from his momentary loss of bodily function and grinned at her. This rocks though, I was hoping we could team up. Now I just need someone who can match Tenya's mobility. He blinked as Izuku spotted the teen in question talking with Shoto, Momo, and Denki. His lips pursed tightly. That was going to be a strong team. But, he had a plan. And with the right crew, Izuku knew he could make it work. He glanced at the clock. They still had just under 14 minutes to pick partners and strategize. No sense in wasting more time. Mr. First place. I insist upon an alliance. Izuku yelped and spun around at the voice that was way too close for comfort, his eyes nearly bulging out upon seeing a pair of goggles right smack in his face. The owner of said goggles was an incredibly energetic and direct girl with pink hair. Chako stared at her in surprise. You're that girl who flew across the pit with all that gear. Right, you are. She confirmed. I'm Mei Hatsume of the support course. I don't know you, but I'd like to use your position as first place to promote my super cute babies. I'm aiming to catch the notice of big companies, and what better way than to join up with the winner of the obstacle course. All eyes are gonna be on you and I'd receive maximum attention. Or rather, my babies would. Izuku was, frankly, completely overwhelmed by just how in-your-face the girl was. He could only stare and shrink back a bit as Mei got closer and closer to explain her reasons for apparently joining his team. It didn't seem like he was going to get a choice in the matter. Chako held her hands up in an attempt to slow the girl down. Hold on. Babies. Big companies. What are you? The support course spends its time developing gear for heroes to use in the field. Gear that takes advantage of or enhances quirks. I've got tons of babies, so there's definitely going to be one that suits you. Chako tried not to feel too annoyed by the hyperactive girl's complete disregard of her. She's got no interest in me at all, huh? Izuku suddenly recovered from his shock when Mei laid out several pieces of gear in front of him. Wait, hold up. Do you have anything that's flammable? Something that can help me increase the amount of fire I can use. My quirk lets me create and control flame, but I can't make very much of it on my own. Is that so? Mei grinned eagerly and began to tinker with a few things. I've got just the thing. It'll only take me a second to adjust. Anything in particular you're aiming for? His brain went into full strategist mode, and suddenly he knew exactly what they were doing. Izuku's eyes swept over the remaining students still looking for a team to join, and locked onto the one he wanted. Thankfully, he had not been chosen yet. And as he went to approach him, he told Mei what he needed as simply as possible. I need a flamethrower. In the hallways of the Colosseum, All Might was walking back to the teacher's seats after getting a drink. The large grin on his face wasn't just for show, he was legitimately smiling uncontrollably. Izuku had done incredibly well in the first challenge, and left a huge impact on the audience. He couldn't have been prouder of his successor. Of course, this was just the first of many challenges, but All Might felt a lot more confident now that Izuku would be able to hold his own. As he walked to the stairs that would lead him up to his seat, he caught a glimpse of another man walking down, a man cloaked in flame. Hey there. All Might called to him, causing the man's backbone to stiffen. It's been a while, Endeavor. Let's have tea. Endeavor glanced over his shoulder, scowling at the symbol of peace. All Might. What's it been, 10 years? I figured it'd be nice to catch up. Take your tea somewhere else, Endeavor growled back as he started to walk down the stairs again. I've got no interest in playing nice with you. Why so cold? All Might appeared in front of the fiery hero in a flash of movement, forcing Endeavor to stop and glare at him. I just wanted to ask you something. Endeavor's glare was venomous. Okay, but I get to ask something of you for reminding me of some questions I've got. Sure. All Might agreed, surprised frankly that Endeavor had accepted so easily. If I may, your son Shoto has made quite the showing only by using half of his power. He's really impressed me. You must have taught him extensively. What are you getting at? I want to know how you trained him so well. I'm still new at this teaching thing, and I'd like to learn anything you can tell me about raising the next generation. Endeavor was silent for a few moments. Pick your students better. Sorry. You heard me. UA's standards have really fallen if they're accepting some of the trash I've seen today. All Might tilted his head. I'm not sure if what young Katsuki said upset you or not, but that's no reason to assume the others aren't. I could care less about some wet behind the ears runt who thinks he can conquer the world, Endeavor huffed dismissively. He'll earn his place sooner or later. No, I'm talking about that thing the school took in. All Might was silent, but Endeavor wasn't buying it if his rage-contorted face said anything. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. As the number 2 hero, I've got access to student profiles at UA. My turn to ask the questions. How the hell did that creature come to exist? Your father, Endeavor, you know how babies are made. Why wasn't it terminated? All Might felt his rare temper start to fray. Don't confuse the boy for his father. They're nothing alike. You know damn well what it was capable of and you're defending its spawn. Endeavor spat. It should be destroyed. People are going to say the same thing as soon as they realize what it really is. That bloodline should be dying in a cell, not participating in a tournament for aspiring heroes. That's enough. He's just a child and he wants to be a hero. I intend to help him become one. Then you're a hypocrite, Mr. Symbol of Peace. You were the one who threw Viper into a prison. You should be the first in line to make sure all traces of him are wiped away from the world. And you should remember who dragged you to safety when you started an unnecessary fight that nearly burned down an entire city. Endeavor stiffened and glared at All Might viciously, but he didn't care. The fiery hero was really pushing it. All Might was losing his temper, but he also knew that this was not the time nor place to settle their differences. I've lost interest in our talk. Sorry for bothering you. But let me make something as clear as I can. I will defend Izuku as if he were my own child. You threaten him at the risk of your health. Defending the world is one thing, O Symbol of Peace, Endeavor snarled. But fighting the world is a very different matter. I wouldn't have to do anything. Sooner or later, someone will do what should have been done long ago. I pity that someone. The rest of their life will be spent behind bars, All Might retorted before walking around Endeavor. He only made it to the top of the stairs when Endeavor spoke suddenly. This is because of her, isn't it? All Might didn't stop walking. This conversation is over. Endeavor merely sneered as he heard the Symbol of Peace disappear upstairs. Lovesick fool. Aizawa was shaken from a brief nap by President Mick, who was as eager as ever. Wake up, buddy. The 15 minutes dedicated to forming teams and making strategies are up. We got 13 warhorses on the field. The mummified heroes studied said warhorses carefully. Looks like we've got quite the interesting lineup. Shout those war cries from the top of your lungs and fire the signal. Mick declared. The bloodbath of the obstacle race was just the start. It's time for things to get even more brutal. Are you ready? Izuku tightened the band on his head, displaying over 10 million points for the other teams that all had eyes on them. Get ready, guys. Just like we planned. Roger. Ichako replied. Fufufu, Hatsume laughed confidently. Understood, Fumikage nodded. 3, 2, 1. Start. Immediately, virtually every team went after Izuku's, seeking the 10 million points for a surefire win. It seemed like an easy enough mark after all. Izuku's team had chosen to start in the corner of the field. Here goes. Izuku pointed Hatsume's device, which was basically a hose attached to a backpack at the ground a few meters away, and then shot a jet of clear, gel-like liquid in a half circle in front of them. As soon as the line of gel was established, Izuku tossed a fireball at it, and a curtain of emerald fire 10 feet high roared to life. Sh. Tetsu of 1B snarled as his horse was forced to come to a stop. Damn support course. Is that Napam Toru shrieked from atop her own horse. Fufufu. It's a fuel I developed to power some of my babies, but it can be used like Napam. Mei cackled in glee. See, you big companies, even my sources of energy are quite adaptable. Oh, that's gotta burn. The 10 million points is literally under fire. We're gonna need a few dozen buckets of ice water over here. Mick exclaimed. Izuku snapped as soon as the barrier was protecting them from the other students. Fumikage. Onto phase 2. Fumikage nodded. Dark shadow. Aye. The shadowy creature agreed as it extended, reaching around Izuku to fiddle with the backpack. Mei instructed Dark Shadow, while Izuku continued to build up on their defensive plan. Ichako, make me float, but keep a grip on me. You're the boss. Ichako grinned, lightening the load on all of them by making Izuku weightless. The goal of that move was to give them an escape route in case someone did break through the barrier, and also to help Ichako, Mei, and Fumikage conserve their strength. While Izuku's team was busy operating behind the wall of flame, Katsuki eyed the barrier with annoyance. Yeah, I figured Deku made some master plan. Bastard had too much time to plot. What do we do? Hanta grumbled to his left. The 10 million points are out of reach. Can't you blast through the fire or something? No point. He's gotta have a counter move in case I go after him, Katsuki retorted. Icy Hot's already taking the bait, see? Shoto's team was prowling along the edge of the flames, trying to find a way through, but Katsuki knew it wouldn't be so simple. This kind of strategic game was right up Izuku's alley, and there was no way in hell he was going to settle for just one line of defense. No, he had to have a strategy that would stall. Izuku had time on his side. The game was pretty short, and he'd no doubt come up with ways to counter his enemies. Whoever went after him would be playing by his rules, and they wouldn't have the time to win. Katsuki knew that if he'd had a bit more time, he probably could have outplayed Izuku and taken his points, but he wasn't willing to put all his eggs in that one basket. Forget Deku, if Icy Hot somehow gets the 10 million, we'll hijack it from him, but I'm not wasting my time on that. Besides, Katsuki grinned viciously. There's plenty of gold mines around here that we can pillage. You know, looking at you it isn't obvious, but you're a pretty good strategist yourself, ain't ya? Ijiro snickered in front of him. The hell does that mean, hair for brains? Mitsuki grinned at the television as they watched Izuku and Katsuki begin to execute their individual plans for the competition. I had a feeling they'd go all strategy mode for this game. Look at them, they're acting like they own the place. I don't understand why they didn't team up, Inko frowned. They didn't even talk to each other when they were picking teams. They both probably figured that their quirks aren't compatible for a game like this, Misaru told her. Both of them need their hands to make their quirks work effectively, and this game makes it so only one of them would have full use of their abilities. Inko inclined her head slightly, though her frown remained. Mitsuki added on to her husband's reassurances. You know how they are, Inko. Whenever they're playing those strategy games on their computers, they're always talking about how they're going to adapt in different situations as the game goes on. They know each other well enough to understand when their skill sets are going to work well or clash, and they must have decided that for this game, they couldn't do their best by working together. I suppose so, Inko sighed. Mitsuki glanced around Inko at the little girl watching the television. What do you think, Eri? Eri, for the moment, was completely glued to the screen and didn't hear a word Mitsuki said, prompting a snigger from the Bakugo matriarch. She's already picking up on their bad habits. Izuku held his left hand out towards the curtain of flames between them and the other teams, and carefully began to manipulate his power. He could see at least 3 or 4 teams waiting to ambush them, but they were going to be very disappointed if they thought the flames were his sole defense. He slowly twisted his hand to the left, as though he were adjusting the temperature of an oven burner with one of the knobs. It took a lot of concentration because this was a new skill he'd been working on that had yet to be perfected. If he screwed this up, it would weaken their primary defense too much, and leave them open to attack. Fumikage glanced back up at him and spotted emotion. What are you doing? Lowering the temperature, Izuku replied shortly. Color flames become darker so they can absorb heat easier. If they get dark enough, Dark Shadow will get stronger and our defense will improve overall. The falcon-headed teenager stared at his leader in complete surprise. He somewhat expected that Izuku would have an in-depth strategy to keep them going this game, but he hadn't expected this. I told him about Dark Shadow's weakness not 20 minutes ago, and he's already developed a way to bolster it. Fumikage remembered their first training exercise at UA, recalling how Katsuki had described Izuku's strategic thinking during his team fight. So this is what he meant. "How are things going, Mei?" Izuku asked. "The backup is done," she responded. "We're good to go. What's the next step?" "Get the flamethrower ready for Dark Shadow," Izuku grinned confidently, surprising the rest of his team, well, except Mei, who had only just met him. "We're going on the offensive." "Wait, what?" Ichako squeaked in surprise. "I thought we were staying behind the fire." "Oh, we are," he confirmed. "But I want to discourage anyone from getting any ideas of breaching the wall. We'll poke them from under or fire. Mei, prep the flamethrower to repair any holes in our defense. I'm going to try and blast Shoto's team first." "Roger that." Ichako stared up at Izuku while he continued their strategy. He was grinning wildly, his usually hidden confidence out in full view. His eyes were light and eager for battle. His hands were clenched, as though he couldn't wait to fight. Frankly, he looked a lot like Katsuki. Speaking of which, Katsuki Bakugo's team is on a rampage. President Mick howled excitedly. "Look at them go. They're getting awfully biased there," Eraser had retorted. He had to admit though, Katsuki's strategy was working like a charm. Katsuki Bakugo was known for being flashy if nothing else, and in true Katsuki fashion, he had devised a plan as flashy as possible. For Katsuki had basically become an explosive human whip, and he was absolutely destroying anything in his way. The attack would begin like this. Katsuki would jump off of his horse and fly to the nearest team with his explosions. Before they even knew what was happening, he used his stun grenade technique in midair to completely disorient the entire team, and then proceeded to steal their headband. Hanta would then reel his leader back in with his tape and return Katsuki to the horse. Ijiro would take most of Katsuki's weight and the impact of his return, so that Mina could fire off streams of acid with one hand, and block the path of any team trying to reclaim their headbands. It was stupidly daring, completely ridiculous, and utterly infuriating for the enemy teams, and Katsuki was having the time of his life. "Hell yeah." Katsuki cackled wildly as he returned to the horse with another headband. "Get wrecked, you noobs." Mina rolled her eyes, but she was still smirking. "You are such an ass." "We're winning this, though," Ichiro told her. "Check it out. We already passed up Shoto's team. The only one ahead of us is Izuku." "Deku doesn't count," Katsuki sneered, cracking his knuckles. "We're in first place for all I care. All I want is to put Icy Hot in his place on rock bottom. Now, who's next?" Hanta glanced around. "What about whoa, look out." Katsuki whipped his head up just in time to see a fireball go sailing over the curtain of flame blocking Izuku's team from the others. It was actually quite small, but that was made up for by the fact that nearly a dozen more fireballs followed after it, and proceeded to rain down on the enemy teams trying to find a way through the flame shield. Said teams were forced to scramble away in order to avoid the shots, but they were meant to annoy them more than anything. One of them came sailing towards Katsuki's team, and he merely sneered and blew it away with an explosion. Deku's getting too excited back there if he's starting to throw shots at the other teams. Hair for brains, keep an eye out for more of those missiles. If he gets ambitious, we'll jump the 10 million points just for good measure. Katsuki knew that was unlikely, though. Izuku certainly had a confident side, but he was really good at keeping it under control. If anything, he'd use his apparent overconfidence as a way to bait enemy teams, and then crush them. They had been playing strategy games together for a very long time. If Katsuki had learned one thing by now, it was this. Izuku would turn your world inside out if you played his game. Katsuki would not make the mistake of getting too greedy by going after Izuku, and triggering whatever freakish traps he had laid in wait for them. The explosive team took a brief glance at the clock. Less than 5 minutes remaining. This was going to be where the crazy plays started coming out. "Bakunais, keep up the defensive acid," Katsuki decided. "Hair for brains, same to you. Defend." Soy sauce face, if someone gets ambitious, tape them so I can go in for the kill. We're waiting for someone else to poke the sleeping bear behind those flames before we make a move. "My name is Mina," the acidic teen retorted. "And wouldn't it be better if we just defended and waited for the game to end?" "Yeah man, we've got this," Ijiro added, glancing up at his leader. "Why not just hold out until it's over?" Katsuki bared his teeth aggressively. "It ain't gonna play out like that. Someone's gonna get desperate as the clock winds down and hit the beehive with a baseball bat, then everything is gonna go to hell." All Might was tapping his foot incessantly on the ground as he watched. Barely 4 minutes were left on the clock now. This was going to be where things got ugly. Izuku had been playing defensively for most of this game, and it had worked early on. He poked at the other teams on the other side with those little fireballs, discouraging them or irritating them to the point of giving up and looking for points elsewhere. It had worked so far. It was a good plan. But now Shoto and his team were getting desperate, and All Might knew a big move was coming from them. Izuku had effectively locked them out, and the only way they were getting in was with a battering ram. And Shoto had a battering ram on his right side. "Shoto, are you sure about this?" Momo asked. She wanted the 10 million points as badly as he did, but they were still guaranteed a spot in the top 4 with their current point value. Katsuki's team had pulled ahead, but the next best team was still several hundred points behind them. They still had a good margin of error in case they weren't able to get the 10 million points. Shoto was beyond frustrated by Izuku's successful defense, and the way he had thwarted every attempt to break in. If he tried to freeze the ground and smother the flames, Izuku either fired more of that napalm stuff, or he made the temperature rise until the fire was white hot and made his ice useless. They also tended to create a thick layer of hot steam that would further repel his advances. His own fire wouldn't do anything. Denki's electricity could do nothing. Tenya couldn't run through the flames. Not only was it suicidal, but they were damn sure Izuku had something planned for them in case they did try it. Momo had managed to temporarily stop a section of the flames by creating a fireproof tarp, but the moment the flames went down, Dark Shadow lunged through the gap and just threw the tarp away, whilst throwing a sucker punch at Shoto. Fumikage's defenses, bolstered by Izuku and his temperature control to keep the flames and thus the area where Dark Shadow was dark, was a formidable tool. It was ridiculous. Shoto had thought he'd be able to break through the wall in the first 5 minutes, but now there were just 3 minutes left, and he was running out of ideas. Izuku seemed bound and determined to counter every single plan he came up with, and deny all opportunities to steal his massive bounty. Even more infuriating was that when Momo had temporarily broken through the wall, Shoto had gotten a good look at Izuku's face. He'd been smirking, as though he knew their attempt to break in was useless and wouldn't work. The look on his face made Shoto's blood boil. Was he being taunted? He thought the boy had been rattled by his challenge before the event began, but now he wasn't so sure. Izuku seemed more than happy to just figuratively throw a middle finger at him every time Shoto tried to get to the 10 million points. Every single time. I'm sure, he told Momo. We're breaking in and taking those points. Tenya, are you ready? I'm ready. Denki. Let's do this. Shoto hoisted the 2 cloaks Momo had created, one to block flame, the other to block lightning. They twisted their horse so that Shoto had a clear line of sight to use his eyes. Now, Shoto unleashed a glacial assault upon the curtain of fire. It wasn't just a little this time, or enough to smother the flames. No. In an instant, he created a massive wall of ice that completely swallowed up the fires faster than they could burn, but he was careful to leave a single, small opening for them to get in. Of course, said opening was still on fire. He threw the heat-retardant cloak over Tenya, and then used the electricity-blocking one to protect himself, Tenya, and Momo from the next stage of their plan. Tenya blasted through the wall of flames, say thanks to the heat-resistant properties of his cloak, and getting his team to the other side, before anyone could be burned. As soon as they were on the other side, Denki unloaded a huge burst of lightning, frying anything he could reach. As soon as the shock was over, which only lasted a couple of seconds, Shoto threw the cloaks off and lunged towards Izuku's team. Get them. Shoto. Momo shouted in alarm. Shoto whipped his head up and froze for 2 reasons. 1, because Izuku was floating about 20 feet in the air, surrounded by a ring of fire he'd somehow managed to save from his instantaneous freeze. And 2, because Dark Shadow was easily 5 times his original size now and was looming over them, having blocked Denki's electric assault with only mild difficulty. Unbeknownst to Shoto's team, the huge wall of ice he created to smother Izuku's flames was a lot better at making shade than Izuku's dark fire. He had unwittingly empowered Dark Shadow, and completely negated their attempt at a break-in. Now between Shoto and the 10 million points was a much bigger and stronger Dark Shadow than he'd anticipated, Fumikage, Mei, a Chako, and a floating Izuku with plenty of fire for him to defend with. Suddenly, they were trapped. A wall of ice and fire behind them, a huge dark monster in front, and a floating pyromancer with an aptitude for outplaying every single move they made. This had been a huge mistake. Izuku had completely outsmarted him. He had expected Shoto to do something big and break in, and, by sheer luck, found a way to twist that to his own favor. He couldn't have known for certain that Dark Shadow would be empowered by the break-in attempt, after all. But nobody ever said luck wasn't a part of victory. Fumikage immediately went on the offensive. Dark Shadow. Trap them against the wall. Damn straight. Dark Shadow shrieked in triumph. Shoto could see Izuku above them, getting his fire to spin rapidly, as though he were planning something. He had no choice now. They were in such a bad spot that defense was the only option remaining. He stabbed a spear of ice into the ground, and as quickly as he could, created a shell around him and his team. It meant they were trapped in a cave of ice against the wall with no way out, but it kept them safe from losing their points. Dark Shadow slammed his massive claws into the ice, but it was too thick to break through with his current strength, so the creature only leered at them through the glassy ice, and hissed in frustration. Holy crap, Denki gulped. That was almost really bad. Shoto, Tenya glanced at him over his shoulder. Shoto grit his teeth. We were baited. He knew we would do this. Break in somehow. Damn him. Momo sighed. We've got enough points on our own to get into the last round. We'll remain here until the game ends so that Dark Shadow can't reach us. If he breaks through the shell, Izuku will no doubt have a plan to steal our headband. Shoto nodded, laying his forehead against the ice in frustration. Izuku was becoming more and more of a problem than he'd initially thought. His fists clenched and the look in his eyes darkened. He'd have to shut him down during the fighting part of the tournament. Nothing less would satisfy him. If he defeated that flame, Endeavor would be completely shunned from his life. Izuku let out a breath as he watched Shoto's team hide behind a shell of ice. He hadn't expected the trap. He glanced at the clock on the big screen. Less than a minute left now. Look out. A Chaco shrieked from below. Izuku whipped back around in midair and blanched. Katsuki was flying down at him and nearly within striking range. Whoa. Heads up. Katsuki's going for the 10 million. This could be it. Present Mix screamed. The Colosseum started going wild, and all eyes were on the two teenagers literally flying 30 feet in the air above the rest of the chaos. Give me that. Katsuki roared at Izuku from mere feet away. Izuku winked his hand back, gathering his flames around his right arm, and struck at Katsuki in order to repel him. Katsuki countered by generating a huge explosion from his palms. The blast drove them apart, but Katsuki fired off a couple of explosions to regain his aerial control, before he lunged at Izuku again. Izuku, however, couldn't control his flight as well. He could push off with his flames, but he was only floating thanks to Chaco's quirk. Izuku shot a stream of fire towards his friend, but Katsuki only repelled himself with another blast around it, and reached out. His fingers wrapped around the headband and he ripped it from Izuku's forehead. He got it. He got it. Mick screeched. Katsuki immediately began launching himself up to get back to his team, but he wasn't expecting the headband to be ripped from his grasp. He snapped his eyes towards Izuku and spotted a thin, transparent line, which had been tied around the headband itself, reeling in the stolen goods back to their original owner. That had been the backup plan in case they somehow lost the points. The retractable line was a feature of May's backpack, and it instantly retrieved the team's lifeline to the final event. He took it back. Mick was losing his mind, and Eraserhead was steadily losing his hearing. I can't believe it. Izuku snatched the headband out of the air with his hand, and propelled himself with his fire back towards his team, never once taking his eyes off of Katsuki. Katsuki wanted to lunge at Izuku again, but he got a brief glance at the clock. 13 seconds left. It wasn't worth the risk, he decided. Izuku was almost back to his team, and Dark Shadow was now aware of his presence. He snarled, blasting himself back over the wall of ice before Izuku and Fumikage could take advantage of his vulnerability in the air, alone and without his team to back him up. There was no point in getting frustrated over it, he knew, even if it still pissed him off a lot. In the first place, this had been only an optional assault in Katsuki's eyes. An opportunity he could take, but he'd still win regardless. He'd already secured a spot in the final round with the amount of points he'd hijacked from other teams. Icy Hot was trapped under Dark Shadow's threat, and, as far as Katsuki was concerned, he'd won the game. With any luck, Icy Hot wouldn't have enough points to make it through to the last round. Wouldn't that just be the cherry on top? Katsuki made it back to his team just as the siren sounded at the end, sneering confidently. This had been his game. He had stomped on these noobs with his own strategic thinking, and damn it, first place was his. Izuku didn't count right now. Katsuki had shown the crowd that he was the real monster in this tournament. The one to look out for. Because he would obliterate anyone in his way, damn it. Time's up. Mick announced as the siren rang. What a wild game. The anticipation. The action. The plays. The bar couldn't be higher for the final round of this tournament. Now, let's announce the 4 teams continuing into the finals. First place goes to Team Izuku. By some miracle and with some of the best defensive strategies we've seen here, they held onto the 10 million points with ease. Second place to Team Katsuki. Their aggression and teamwork were all on point. They were definitely the warlords of this game. The lead they have on the other teams is nuts. Third place goes to Team Tetsu. Wait, what? Third place is Team Hitachi. Where the heck did they come from? For real, what? And in fourth place is Team Shoto. They had some great firepower, but they lost their gamble to go after the 10 million points, while everyone else was duking it out. Luckily, their base point value is still enough to get them into the finals. We're gonna take an hour-long break for lunch. Everyone give your hearts a chance to settle down. You're gonna need it. Hey, Eraser, let's go get food. Eraser only grumbled over the mic. I'm taking a nap. Yes. Mitsuki jumped up and yelled at the top of her lungs. Yes. 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 Get wrecked, all of you. My boys run this joint. Get good or get out. Ahahaha. Izuku. Inko wailed joyfully, tears flying from her eyes at an accelerated rate. Masaru took a few steps away from the shrieking women and sipped his coffee, smiling into the drink. Partly because of Katsuki and Izuku winning, partly because of Mitsuki and Inko losing their minds, but also for one other reason. Eri was jumping up and down on the couch whilst uncontrollably squealing, and it was the most adorably funny thing he'd seen in a long time. We won. Ichako screamed and threw her arms around Izuku to spin him around. We won't. Deku, we won. Izuku's brain was currently short-circuiting because a girl was hugging him and laughing and spinning him around. And what in the actual 7 levels of hell was going on right now? Wait, what? Blue air screen. Yumikage watched Ichako celebrate while Izuku's face went bright red, and he basically fainted from their proximity with some amusement. Dark Shadow was growing more timid as Shoto melted the icy wall with his flame half, but he was quite proud of himself, as well. Mei was already busy working on the backpack she'd loaned to Izuku, tweaking the parts single-mindedly. Shoto's team were released from their icy cavern after a few moments, and, while relieved that they'd won a spot in the finals, were also somewhat disappointed by the result. Shoto especially was looking forlorn. Shoto clenched his fist and stalked towards the lockers. "That's the last time I play into your hands like this, Izuku. You won't be leaving this place in victory, I assure you." Ichako placed Izuku down and started waving at his face when he failed to respond. After all, his face was still bright red, steam was coming from his eyes, and he felt like his brain was telling him a million different things in multiple languages that he didn't understand. "What the hell, did you break him?" Katsuki and his team came over, all of them looking rather satisfied with themselves. Their leader, as cocky and arrogant as ever, slapped Izuku on the shoulder and caused him to yelp back into reality. The team spun towards Katsuki, who smirked at him. "I see you survived. You made that kinda iffy at the end, you know," Izuku muttered. "I ain't your buddy in this tournament, I told you that," Katsuki retorted. "But whatever. Good job making icy hot curl into a ball. That was really satisfying to see." Izuku frowned. "I still think you're being too hard on him." "Well, I don't." Katsuki waved him off, slung an arm around his shoulder, and led their teams back to the lockers. "Come on, let's get some food. I'm starving, damn it." They were making their way to the lunchroom, chatting with the rest of their class and some members of Class B about the final round. Most of the conversation was directed towards Izuku and Katsuki, the apparent strategic masterminds of the last game. A lot of the students were wondering just how in the hell they'd come up with such insane plays. Katsuki was soaking up the attention and answering with all the arrogance one would expect from him, while Izuku was, as usual, more humble and a lot more nervous about being the center of attention. He couldn't say he totally disliked it, though. Unfortunately, the pleasantries had to take a back seat when the group of students turned the corner to the lunchroom and found a tall, intimidating figure blocking their path. "Endeavor." Izuku's face went white, but Katsuki's eyes narrowed. "The hell do you want?" The fiery hero locked onto Izuku and Katsuki like a wolf locked onto sheep and grunted at them. "Come with me for a moment, the both of you. I've got some things to say. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-ifs coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye everyone.